ma'am.
All right, great. So we have a half hour allotted for Public Works. We'll go to 5:34 at the latest. If you want to start with an opening statement, then we'll move on to questions from council members.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon. I'm Mark Sturdivant, the Director of the Public Works Department. I want to thank the Chair Mendez and the committee for inviting us here today. I want to introduce the other people we have here from Public Works participating in the meeting. We have Sharon Wallstrom, who's a Deputy Director and Head of Finance. We have Sharon Smith, who can help with questions on solid waste, recycling, and the hub. We have Jeff Hammond from Engineering and Philip Jones from Operations. I also want to introduce our newest employee, Mr. Jorge Riveros, who is our new Director of Engineering. He just moved here from Austin, Texas in the middle of the pandemic. We've only seen him in a mask, but we look forward to more personal introductions with you when we can meet in person. So, Chair, my opening remarks are going to be brief today. I think we all know with a difficult budget task we have in front of us, we fully expect to have a sizable reduction in our capital programs, and we understand the need for that. But from an operating standpoint, we're going to ask that you try to keep our funding as intact as possible. These are the essential city services that people expect to have from Metro. We think in particular, since the first of the year, the importance of our operations department has been demonstrated over and over, first with the tornado, then with the pandemic, and even 2 weekends ago with the strong storms that did so much damage. We also want to stress to you that in our operations department, our most valuable asset is our people, our employees. And one of the reasons we responded so quickly and effectively after the tornado is that many of our people also worked on the flood in 2010, so they knew what to do and how to respond quickly. That kind of experience is invaluable and can't be replaced. And so we hope you'll keep that in mind as we go through this process. As to the mayor's budget, we feel that it recognizes and adequately allows us to continue the essential services I was just referring to, and importantly includes the contractual increases we're obligated for. So to answer the question, are we okay with the mayor's budget? The answer is yes, we are. So, Chair, those are my opening remarks, and we're ready to respond to your questions and requests, and thank you once again for having this meeting.
Thank you. We'll start with Councilmember Druffel.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Mr. Sturdivant. I learned as I've gotten on the council, you're a very popular man through all this stuff. The one question I had was under non-programmable revenue, other tax license and permits has a steady decline over the last 3 years and is losing another $1,219,000 from 20 to 21. I was just curious as to what that was for and why the steady decline in that area. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to let Sharon Wallstrom, our budget person, handle that one.
Good afternoon. The $1.2 million is comprised of several items. The excavation permits and the temporary street closures are the vast majority of that. That is almost the entire $1 million amount. Part of the reason that that has been taken down is based on the COVID and the lack of construction and some of the other items that we are expecting not to come back until sometime in the third or the fourth quarter of next year. The other piece of it is the Taxi and Licensing Commission. The Transportation Licensing Commission is also projected to lose revenue due to some of the business shutdowns, as well as all of the special event items like film permits, parade permits, and special events. So that's what is comprising that drop of the $1.2 million.
Okay, thanks so much.
Thank you, Councilmember. Councilmember Glover.
Thank you, Chair. Director and Sharon, I'm not sure who you want to answer this. Obviously, it is challenging. Obviously, you, the staff, and everybody else has, witnessed times that we haven't seen ever, as far as I know, back-to-backs like this, and for the amount of time it's been prolonged, et cetera. Given the fact that so many businesses now have been forced to close and are forced to lay off, is that something that if you were able to utilize furloughs, or if you were able to utilize temporary layoffs or something along that nature as opposed to permanent layoffs, is that something that if it was proposed, you might be able to take a look at and determine how to best make it work? And if so, then what would your preference be? The dollar amount looking for, or just the hard cut number?
Okay, I'll give that one a shot. We're pretty lean to begin with, and furloughs, we could only handle, if we were to furlough more than 20 people, our services would start to drop off pretty severely. And Councilman, we'll always look at something with you. We're always glad to consider anything that the council wants us to, but I guess I would probably start with that. Sharon, you want to?
And just for reference, we're currently down 32 employees right now. So as far as furloughing any of the workers that are on the street, that would be a very tough thing to do at this point because we are already shorthanded there.
I think we understand the logic of your question, but we start cutting services pretty quick.
So then let's zero in on the 32 people that you're short right now. Is that already in next year's budget as far as the gross dollar amount anticipated or that has been allotted for your department?
We have already done the true up for the $684,000 that we were requested to permanently decline, and these 32 people are not part of that decline. They are part of the people that are scheduled to go into next year.
Okay. All right. So then you would be able to give a number on what that 632, what that 32 would look like outside of the ones you've already done the decline on.
Yes, I can. We can talk about that offline, and I'd be more than happy to send that to you.
That'd be perfect. Thank you, Chair.
And Ms. Wallstrom, thanks, Councilman Glover. Ms. Wallstrom, can you please be sure to copy Mr. Cooper in the council office? I want to make sure that we give that answer to everybody. And I also would like to call on Mr. Cooper for a second to talk about, since the idea of furloughs and layoffs have come up, there's details about how that works with civil service that I have a hard time keeping track of. Mr. Cooper?
Thank you, Chair. So the council does not have the authority to order any furloughs or layoffs. All the council can do is remove funding from a department's budget, and then the departments determine how to manage that reduction. The Civil Service Commission, in approving the pay plan for this year, did authorize departments to if need be, to furlough employees not to exceed 1 month out of the fiscal year. But that would be a departmental decision, department by department, not a council decision.
Thank you.
All right, and Chair, that's the reason I asked the question the way I did to the director, because I've been looking at every aspect of this. Thank you, Mr. Cooper.
Thanks, Councilmember. I knew with your years of experience that you knew that, but I wanted to make sure we had it out there for everybody else. Councilmember Allen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have several questions. I'll ask one, and then maybe if there's time, you could come back to me if you don't mind.
Sure.
You talked a lot about parking revenues. Is there a possibility of increasing parking revenues through more aggressive surveillance of parking meters and other methods that could potentially add to the budget?
This budget is basically a continuity of service budget for Public Works, and so at this point there would be no additional parking enforcement officers available to hire under this budget.
Could there be possible operational changes that might enable them to collect more with the numbers that they have?
I'm going to let Jeff Hammond answer that question.
Councilmember Allen, we have done that in the past. You may recall last year we did do a slight increase in the parking meter fees. Another thing that's on the table would be a lengthened time in which the meters are in service. So there are a few relatively minor changes that we could make with the current parking meter system.
Okay, thank you.
All right, so Councilmember Allen, thanks for going with the one question. I'm going to leave you in the queue afterwards, and for everybody else that I call on, I'll ask that you do the same thing, maybe ask a question, and if you've got more, let me know, and I'll come back to you if we have time. Councilmember Henderson is next.
Thank you, Chair. My first question builds on that of Councilman Druffel's regarding program revenue, both in GSD and USD as the budget book kind of positions them. And so, Ms. Wallstrom, you framed it really in the context of, COVID and the tornado and so forth, but in previous budget years, we've been seeing that number decline. And so, if I go back in my previous budget books and look at, 2018 actuals and then 2019 actuals, and, I do see a significant kind of overtime decline. And so I wonder if you can speak to it more broadly than just in the context of, recently and your projected revenue for this coming budget year. But can you kind of, look to the past and see why, even outside of the context of this moment, those revenues have been declining substantially?
One of the things that happened was we had a large increase, and it spiked, and now it's declining in the communications companies, and specifically the Google coming in and pulling permits in order to be able to put their infrastructure in. So whenever all of that was basically put in, you're now seeing that the permits and that temporary street closure numbers are starting to drop because they have basically installed a lot of their infrastructure already. The reason that it's still holding a little bit higher than normal was because of the large growth that we're having in Nashville right now and the contractors that are pulling permits and temporary street closures. So at this point, with everything else that has happened, it has been projected that those permits, which make up just about $1 million of that, which is what I said earlier, are probably going to continue to decline, and that's why we have projected it that way.
Okay, I appreciate that. I'll probably do a follow-up question on that via Ms. Calder. But on your questions that you submitted to the committee, you were looking at the proposed budget and the $10 million in amount higher. I know a lot of those are contractual increases around solid waste that you pointed out. But additionally, you said annual appropriated expenditures increasing by $6.46 million. And I wonder if you could clarify that amount. So as part of that $10 million, $4 million of that was explained in detail, but I'm not finding the detail on the $6.46 million.
That $6.46 million is the amount that is transferred from the General Services Division, the GSD, and the USD into the Solid Waste Special Revenue Fund. Solid waste does not earn enough revenue to be able to cover all of its expenditures, and so annually money is transferred from the general fund into the solid waste fund. So if you look at your budget book, in some of the detailed pages, you can see where there is a transfer into the solid waste, and solid waste where they're showing the revenue from the transfer from the GSD and the USD fund.
Okay, I appreciate that. So that's something that's pretty much happening every year to varying degrees.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you for the clarification.
All right, thank you. Councilmember Gamble.
Thank you, Chair, and I apologize. I missed some of the opening remarks, and I apologize if this was addressed in those opening remarks. But my question is in regards to the GSD general fund, other expenses. I noticed that all the operating expenses in every category except other expenses has increased, and just wonder what is encompassed in that.
Okay, so you're looking at the general fund and which account?
The GSD general fund, other expenses.
Okay. The expenses there, that was where they had put the targeted budget savings, and so that is the offset to that. So we increased that other expenses line by the $684,800, and we apportioned that out in negative numbers through all the other lines. So that was our true up for the last year's targeted budget savings becoming permanent this year.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Councilmember. Councilmember Porterfield.
Thank you so much, Chair. I have I guess it's a follow-up question to Councilwoman Allen's question earlier. Have you guys done any type of cost-benefit analysis to see how much money we're leaving on the table from the unpaid parking tickets? I know this is something that's been discussed for at least the last few years, and we're having situations where people sitting downtown, sitting on a parking meter all day because they know that there's not a lot of enforcement, taking the risk on if they're going to get a ticket. And when people get multiple tickets, we are not booting them, we're not towing them. So how much money are we actually losing by not enforcing our parking regulations? How much money are we losing in not collecting on those parking tickets? And how much could we possibly bring in if we were able to hire someone to do the enforcement? And if you don't have that answer, I would love to get it from you later. Thank you.
Okay, I'll respond real quick. We write the parking tickets. They then go over to the Traffic Violations Bureau for adjudication. So we do not know how many of those are collected or not collected. That revenue goes into their budget and their accounts. We can coordinate with them to find that out and try to get an answer back to you.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Councilmember. Now we're going to head back to Councilmember Allen. And before you start, Councilmember Henderson, do you have more questions also?
Yes, Chair. I just had a quick follow-on question to Ms. Porterfield's and Council Lady Allen's earlier. So while I appreciate Ms. Wallstrom's answer, the tickets and where they go to be adjudicated, I think what our Public Works Committee has asked about for quite some time, and then it came up in the context of the potential sale of the parking system was, what in our view was kind of a lack of a kind of performance audit or review of how we were using, the current parking officers. So to Council Lady Allen's question, how are we kind of optimizing the staff that we have? And so, if we are not, booting people, moving them off the meters, it's not just about the ticket revenue, it's also about we are not facilitating turnover because there's an awareness that we are not, systematically working through the system and so forth. So I just, I did not know if Ms. Wallstrom or Mr. Sturdivant, if you could speak to just on the operation side of kind of optimizing. I think we all recognize we need to update our parking system and how that works. but I have struggled to see how we have done any kind of diligent work to optimize what we currently have. So if somebody could speak to that and what the implications for that would be from a revenue perspective. Thank you.
Well, the short answer, this is Jeff Hammond, the short answer is we don't know the answer to that in great detail because what you're asking is how much money are we leaving on the street by not having more enforcement or more guidelines and so forth, and we simply don't know that. The closest thing that we have to it would be the process that we went through roughly a year and a half ago, where a company comes in and assesses our situation, the number of meters, how we're enforcing, and so forth, and then would make a proposal to that. And my understanding is that we're in the early stages of re-looking at that type of a thing, but that's really the best way to go about looking at how well or poorly a city is doing in making those collections. We simply are using the resources that we have and collecting, and we can tell you on a monthly basis, for instance, per officer, how much we are collecting, and maybe you can extrapolate from that. But we really don't have a way to say, given our 4 officers, we're leaving this much money on the table. We just don't know that.
All right, thank you. Council Member Allen, let's go back to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. One question about recycling. There's a line item but in the budget that says that we're increasing costs for trash and compost collection, waste disposal, and recycling of $3.5 million. Is that in addition to the $1.5 million that we just added to the waste management contract? Could someone sort of explain how those interact?
No, ma'am, that includes that number. So most of that is the contracted increase, and about $750,000 of that is for trash collection, the 2 contractors that we have there. $72,000 of it is for our composting contractor who handles all the brush and mulches, turns that into mulch, and then the remainder of that is for the recycling processing.
Anything else, Councilmember Allen?
Sorry, I keep muting the wrong way. Is that an increase over what we spent this year?
Yes, it is.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Councilmember Sledge.
Thank you, Chair. I wanted to return back to this conversation about parking because I was actually coming on regarding increase in the parking fees. And I was told on pretty good authority that we are collecting on 10% of all tickets written. So, I know that in the line item year after year, the parking fine is usually somewhere around $1.5 million. There was some discussion about how much of that's moving, how much of that's parking, but if we're leaving 90% of our parking ticket revenue table, we're clearly doing something wrong. So and to the point about enforcement, I would love to see us not reinvent the wheel on this, because the previous cost we got about starting to do card payment on meters, if you started collecting anywhere near what the tickets we were writing, that thing pays for itself in a year. So I just want to be real clear on this as somebody who had to dive into it kind of early on in this term, that I feel like a lot of the work's already been done, and it's just a matter of somebody signing off on it. That's not a question, Chair, but I just heard questions that I felt like I could be answered due to the research I had done. So,
all right, thank you. Councilman Glover?
Thank you, Chair. Well, this is not for the department. If you would like, you can come back to me at the end before we complete today's meetings.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you. Councilmember Hancock?
Hi, thank you for taking my question. I was wondering, regarding the $3.5 million increase that Council Lady Allen mentioned, is that broken down? Do we have any idea of the percent of that would be GSD versus USD? And is it
GSD does not get recycling pickup, but we can drop off recycling at the facilities?
Yes, ma'am. You can drop off at the convenience centers and also at the drop-off sites, and that is GSD and USD.
Right, but the cost is probably higher for USD because of the curbside pickup. So I was wondering if we have a breakdown of that.
I would have to go back and do that. I don't have that with me at this particular moment. Part of that cost increase is also for the brush collection and the processing of the brush that's collected, which is GSD and USD also.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Councilmember. Councilmember Allen, more questions?
I think she's the only one.
No, sir. That's got them all. Thank you. I'll lower my hand.
Okay, thank you. And Councilman Glover, just to confirm, you don't have anything for Public Works, just a discussion point when we wrap up?
That would be correct. Thank you.
All right. Council members, it looks like nobody else is in the queue. So, Mr. Sturdivant and your whole team, like everybody else we've talked to today and yesterday, boy, we know how y'all are on the front lines, and your teams are out there working their tails off for the city in the aftermath of the tornado and the storm and dealing with COVID-19. So, on behalf of everybody, thank you very much for everything y'all are doing. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, so we'll be done with the department hearings now, and I'll turn to Councilman Glover to hear what he has to say.
All right, so very quickly, and I don't know who wants to answer this question. I don't know if it's you, Chair, or if it's Mr. Cooper, or who will answer it. All right, so we got our workbooks, obviously, Friday afternoon. For those of us working on a substitute budget, we spent the weekend doing that as the last couple of days as well, and into tomorrow to turn it in for tomorrow afternoon. My question is pretty simple. Given the short time frame in order to try and put together such a complex piece of puzzle, once we turn them in, because I've been trying to get in touch with finance for a day or so now and gotten no return calls, will we have an opportunity to talk through and make any final adjustments with them as we go forward, or are we basically stuck?
That's definitely not a me question, so I'm going to hand that to Mr. Cooper.
So, Councilman, the plan that we have worked out and the discussions we've had with finance is that you would get the substitute, what you want in the substitute, turned in tomorrow by 4:30. Thursday and Friday, Maria and I will work through those to make sure that they balance and that it's an appropriate or legal use of funds. And then we will turn that product into finance by Friday afternoon. As they are working on the substitute, and it's my understanding it takes a couple of weeks for them to actually create them, if they have questions about what's submitted, then they will get those back to us, and if there are clarifications that need to be made, that can be done.
So during the Thursday and Thursday and Friday process with the council office, if there's anything of clarification, will those of us who have submitted our substitute budgets, will we get a phone call back?
Absolutely.
Where we have an opportunity to talk it and walk it through?
Yes.
Okay. And then my final question is simply this. For that is not accomplished in the substitute, and we determine how we want to try to move forward, should substitutes now work, and we look at amendments. It's my understanding, and I just want to make sure rules haven't changed on this, because rules seem to change all the time, that the substitute, the only two amendable substitute, or not, excuse me, the only amendable budgets are the mayor's budget and the one substitute from the chair of Budget and Finance.
Correct. The mayor's budget and the first substitute accepted are the only ones that can be amended.
then my final part on any amendments, if it changes anything with regards to the taxation proposed in either the mayor's budget or the chair's substitute budget, would that be allowable with an amendment, or would that only be allowable through through the substitute?
You could increase revenue or decrease expenditures through an amendment with a corresponding amendment to the tax levy.
And so if we did that, then in essence, we would be lowering the tax rate by telling where we want to reduce the spending and then lowering it in the tax levy under that bill.
Theoretically, yes. I mean, it gets, the more you change, the more complicated it gets, but it is possible to make changes by amendment. Yeah,
well, there's none of this that's been fun, as we're all aware, but there's a whole lot of businesses out here that are still not open that it's not fun for. All right, thank you, Chair.
And I'm going to ask Mr. Cooper a follow-up based on your questions, Councilmember. On the borderline between what is, because I get the point, there's some line items you can change and it changes one line item and a total. There's other things that then go implicate 4% funds and other things that ends up being more numbers. Who is the final decider of whether something can be an amendment or has to be a substitute?
So we would take whatever changes council members want to make and get with finance to determine if that is something that could be changed by an amendment, or if that would end up blowing the whole budget up and changing a bunch of different things or having a bunch of unintended consequences. So we will work with finance at the time on a case-by-case basis.
Thank you. Mr. Glover, were there any more follow-ups there?
No, I just want to make sure that once this is turned in tomorrow, that there is not that's not the final, decree of what perhaps it goes to finance, because I think as rapid and as rushed and everything else that's occurred on this, I just don't think we're doing the taxpayers justice, because candidly, I don't like the process, and I just felt like I needed to understand what all the options are. Thank you.
All right, thank you. This appears to have prompted several questions. Councilmember Suara, let's start with you.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I guess my question is, since we got the book on Friday, any possibility of extending that deadline? Because it's just so tight, let me say that. So any possibility of shifting in a day or two?
I'm going to let it's not my deadline. I just want everybody to be real clear. This is not my deadline.
Well, then let's change it. If we
I know, but I feel bad deflecting fair questions, but I'm going to put it on Mr. Cooper to answer that one.
So this was a deadline that was set by finance, and it's simply because of the bandwidth that they have and the efforts that have to go into creating a substitute. I don't think anyone likes the timeline, and everyone wishes that they had tons of staff that could crank these out. But the bottom line from the meetings that we've had with them is that they simply don't. So if it's multiple substitutes at one time, especially coming in as we get towards the end of the process, they just can't get the work done. So that's why the deadline was set when it is.
Now, with all due respect, Mr. Cooper, we were supposed to get the book earlier than we got it. And so my understanding was we were going to get it earlier in the week, and we did not get it until Friday. So based on that change in the time that we actually got it, I think a day or two seemed reasonable, in my opinion. And so that's what I'm asking for.
So it's important to note that the substitute budget is not a substitute budget book. That's the substitute budget ordinance, and the ordinance was filed on April 30th, so which council members got then. So that is what would be changing. And it's my understanding that the budget book was actually delivered at the time that they indicated that they could have it prepared. I don't remember an earlier date.
Well, can
What was that, Councilmember Suara?
I was speaking, I forgot I mute myself. Thank you, Mr. Cooper. I was just trying. But my follow-up question is, let's say there's a group or person that wants to have a substitute but not make the deadline tomorrow, they can still submit one, or that's the end of it. I know the finance would not work on it, but are they still able to submit one regardless?
Are you asking whether the council office could work on it if finance isn't?
Yes, that's my question.
So finance controls it's their program, it's their financial system, their knowledge and skill and program is what creates the budget. What the council office does is we submit a list of changes to make to the substitute that council members are wanting, and then they go in and plug all that in. So if the question is whether the council office could come up with a substitute budget that was correct, my answer would be no.
Thank you.
Council Member Allen?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think, for new council members who haven't seen us go through the process, it's helpful to have a good understanding of what the amendment process looks like as opposed to the budget substitute process, and to maybe just explain again how in the past it has been traditional for everyone to have a wish list that they could fill out and say, I think we should give more funding to this department or this area, and here's where we take that funding from. And as I understand it, that option is open to us at a much later deadline than the substitute, an entire substitute ordinance option. Is that correct? And could you just explain that process again one more time so that people are aware that that option remains open longer and how it would work?
Absolutely. So typically what council members want to change, if there's something that they don't like, if a particular agency didn't get enough funding or department didn't get enough funding, or they wanted to create some kind of new program, that's done through an amendment process. And that's simply taking money from one place and putting it in another, or increasing the tax levy to add that particular program or appropriation. So that can absolutely be done by amendment, and that is typically the changes that council members try and make. And that is much later in the process.
And Mr. Cooper, it probably would be appropriate at this time as we got to the hearings this week to have the office send out what Councilmember Allen called the wish list form.
Yeah, I'll have ask Maria to send that out. Sure.
All right. And I'll repeat, although I'm just repeating what Councilmember Allen, Mr. Cooper said. For anybody who has what I'll call it's a big deal, but it's just changing a line item that you want to increase the funding for some particular line item from $1 amount to another dollar amount. The typical process there would not be to have anything to do with substitute. You would pursue an amendment. And what the council office has always asked for years is that if you want to identify, I'll make up a number, $100,000 of more spending on some line item, you have to submit not only which line item you want up to go by 100,000, but you have to point out what you want to reduce by 100,000, so there's still balance. And Mr. Cooper is saying he'll have that form that's been used in previous years sent out. This year there's been a lot more talk about substitute than usual because typically in order to have a dramatic change to the tax rate, it would change usually you'd expect it to change dozens and dozens of numbers in the document, which would require a substitute as opposed to an amendment. Councilmember Allen, do you think there's anything else we should add to that? Or does that cover what you were asking?
That covers what I was asking. Thank you. And then I have another question about nonprofits, but I'll save that for later if we're still on this one.
All right. Let's go to Councilmember Henderson first.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate you recognizing me. As you know, I served on the Budget and Finance Committee last term, no longer serving this term, but chairing the Public Works Committee. And so, you know, I took it upon myself, and I think Vice Chair Young did the same, meeting separately, you know, weeks back to kind of dig into Public Works budget. And I think there always is some questions kind of around, you know, best process as those of us who've kind of served over the years and, you know, seen some patterns or concerns or challenges or areas for improvement of how to effectuate those through the budget. And whether that is to, you know, do the research and try to have influence on the mayor's budget, or whether that will come to bear in the substitute budget of the chair. I know we all often speak about how, as a council body, you know, we're kind of, with all due respect, kind of organized to fail. You know, I mean, we have a strong mayor system. Until this council fought to get one extra person in our finance division. We had one person working on our behalf. We now have Ms. Calder and Mr. Kyle, but as Mr. Cooper said, just kind of the, you know, the setup on the side of finance, that's kind of where the staffing is. And so I know last time, you know, we had Chair Vercher's substitute, we had yours, Mr. Chair, then we had some other substitutes, some amendments. It was somewhat complicated and not ideal. And so I wonder, from your role as chair, do you want input from committee chairs with suggestions as to your substitute? Do we go to Mr. Cooper because maybe what we're suggesting might be better as an amendment? You know, the timeline is so compressed, to Council Lady Suarez's concerns, and you know, we have just over the years, again, you know, respectfully, but, you know, this council engages, particular to a wish list, and, you know, I mean, we just make changes around the margins to the tune of, you know, $2 million here and $1 million there and $300,000 there, and not that that doesn't matter and those aren't big numbers, but this is a $2.4 billion budget. And so from a structural perspective, you know, some of the kind of core work that I think a lot of us feel like we need to do, I understand, Chair, that you're taking a lot of those on your shoulders, and you're capable, and we respect that. But I guess I continue to struggle to figure out how I can do the best work as a chair of a committee to serve the people that I represent in this city, and trying to, you know, have you know, knowledge and research have an impact on this budget. And so I just wonder if you could speak to that, please, on what would be kind of the best way for us as council members to work with you. Thank you.
Sure, thank you. And I'll ask Mr. Cooper if he's got comments after I give my 2 cents worth. You know, this is very compressed. The charter says the mayor proposes a budget by May 1, and we got to be done by June 30th, and we've got our meetings that are set by the calendar, first and third Tuesdays, and we already, to get the budget done in that amount of time, have to have extra meetings and literally dozens of hours usually in the chamber. This time on WebEx, and in addition to all the hours outside the chamber. And this year, the mayor intended and finance intended to compress their timeline in putting together the budget and getting it to us a month early. So if we wanted, we could have taken 3 months instead of 2 months. The universe has conspired against us, and that didn't happen. So yes, it's very compressed. Speaking for myself, in previous years when I've had a substitute, 90% of the work was done before the mayor's budget came out, because it is very, very, very difficult in my experience to wait to read the budget book and then start working on a substitute. It's, other people may be able to pull that off successfully. I wouldn't have been able to. I needed to get the work done before May 1 came around. For this year, to answer the question you asked specifically, I don't, for public open meetings reasons, do not want committee chairs to reach out to me. If committee chairs or any council members have specific suggestions about what should be in a substitute, they need to reach out to Mr. Cooper or Ms. Calder, and they'll collect that information and let me know. I would say that I've got the same deadline everybody else does to get information to finance or to the council office by 4:30 tomorrow. I have not yet made final decisions. If you have an idea that would impact the tax rate, I would highly suggest letting Mr. Cooper know ASAP. If you have an idea that is a line item, even a substantial line item, but you know where the corresponding trade-off would be, then there's no reason to hurry through that because the amendment process will play out mostly in June, not in May. Mr. Cooper, is there anything else that we should add to that?
No, but Maria just sent out the wish list, and once we collect those, we do have the built-in budget work sessions where we can have public discussions about each of those wish list items, and amendments can be created based upon that discussion.
Okay, and Councilman Glover, I don't know whether your hand is up again or still up from before.
No, it's back up.
Go ahead.
So, all right. So, Mr. Cooper, let me throw this out. And I realize that everything got compressed. I know the mayor had wanted to give it to us much earlier. I really thought that was going to kind of be our timeline. Let me go ahead and tell you, I am changing the tax rate. It won't be 32%, so I'll be bringing it down in what I'm going to propose, along with various other suggestions inside of it. So here's really my question. I don't know how many substitute budgets will be presented. I'm trying to figure out, given the circumstances of this year and the complexities that we're all playing with, not really knowing what the numbers will actually look like. We don't have a track record that we're playing off of that has comparisons of any history that we have in the city in order to determine where will we be. We're guessing on everything. That being said, and I don't know who answers this question, is there, because we're doing work sessions and where we're not violating the law, are there opportunities that we would be able to, if we can't necessarily come up with just amendments, because look, those don't always work in anybody's favor either. So would there be an opportunity, given the compressed time frame that we've had, that those who have presented ideas, additional or different substitute budgets, in order for us to maybe critique it, hand it back to the Budget and Finance prior to, I think you're going to plan on doing yours on May 27th, Chair, if I remember reading correctly. Is there any way that we would be able to work to where we're in unison? Because I realize we have a self-imposed deadline by mid-June, but in reality, legally, we only have to have this done by the end of June. So while I appreciate we have a self-imposed deadline, I don't think that could be a realistic one if we're not doing the right thing on behalf of the taxpayers. That's my 2 cents worth.
Yeah, it is a bit of a work in progress. it does feel, I mean, I don't know who else is going to submit information for a substitute tomorrow. But that tomorrow is just the submitting of the information. It doesn't have to be quote unquote filed until you want it considered. And so the latest that I think somebody would have to file a substitute would be if they want to get it in the amendments and substitutes package for our June 2nd meeting, which will be the public hearing, or if they want to get it in the amendment substitute package for our June 16 meeting. And those would be, I guess, the week before. I put May 27 on the timeline for my target for getting mine out to the universe. That's not a filing date because I'll get it in the substitute package for the June 2nd meeting. I plan on having it available to the public, even if I have to put it on my own website, then just so it's out 5-6 days before we have the public hearing. I'm assuming that anybody who wants to pursue a substitute will want their substitute out in the public eye before the June 2nd hearing. But you don't have to do it that way. I'm assuming that most people who have a substitute will want to do that, and that would mean that last week of May is when people would want to have a public eye on their substitute. And to the point about when, I don't have the calendar in front of me, but we've got the scheduled dates for our work sessions, and I'm sure we're going to have a lot of conversation then that will start out unfocused because I think there's going to be a lot of ideas, and hopefully we can work together to get it more focused as we get closer to third reading on the budget.
So let me see if I can translate what I think I heard, and please correct me if I'm wrong. Is that yes, because of the concentrated timeline for this particular budget and the complexities that we inherently have, been given, not that we wanted, but been given due to circumstances we couldn't control, then you would have your substitute, any other substitutes during the work session prior to the actual filing of that bill. We could come in, tweak, and try to work collectively as a group in order to do the job we've been given by being elected in our positions as representatives of the people to look at that prior to the actual filing. I'm going to honor the deadline of tomorrow. I'm going to do that piece of it. But it sounds like to me that we'll be able to work together and collectively to where we work towards a unified body to take care of the taxpayers of Nashville, unless I misunderstood you.
I think all 40 of us are going to have a firm commitment to try to get on the same page by agreement. I think, and hopefully we have better luck than the last couple of years.
All right. Thank you, Chair. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. So we'll go back to Councilmember Allen, a different topic about nonprofits. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a question about process. My understanding is that there may possibly be CARES funding that can fill in some gaps on the nonprofit funding. Those are broken down into two groups: the discretionary spend, the direct appropriations, and the community partners funds. And my question would be, do we need to have a process in place for prioritizing where that funding might go if it is allocated, or are we going to cross that bridge when we come to it, or is it up to us to create a process or to designate again to different departments that they're in charge of certain pieces of that? Do you have specifics on that, or is it possible for us to make suggestions?
Yeah, so I think, I don't know if, I'm 100% sure I do not have a specific answer that's very satisfactory, but I do believe that what I'm about to say is the best information available today. So as you mentioned, and on the spreadsheet that Maria sent around to all council members on Sunday evening, there's listed out a whole bunch of nonprofits that in the current year budget get either a direct appropriation or the recipient for community partnership funds. It is the administration's firm belief that the nonprofits in the third and fourth box in that spreadsheet will be eligible, should be eligible, ought to be eligible for receiving CARES Fund money. That cannot come with certainty because the rules continue to evolve from the federal government, and it does require a certain amount of applying by each agency, and like every year, the nonprofits have to jump through certain hoops to get the money. But I've quizzed finance pretty hard on how firmly they believe that those organizations in those third and fourth boxes on that spreadsheet will be eligible, and they seem convinced, very convinced. That will be a process that runs outside of the council involvement at all. And finance is working with those agencies to make sure that they can apply and get the funds. And so there's that might be 25 organizations that are in the current year's budget, either through direct appropriations or community partnership, that are not in this year's budget. And to their best of the ability of finance, they've worked to convince me that we should just not worry about those because they ought to be covered under CARES Act. And beyond that, as far as requiring the council's involvement, my sense is that we don't need to be involved in that. I think the bigger question about the $121 million that's sitting in a bank account somewhere with Metro, that CARES Act money, and how it's going to be spent more broadly, because the nonprofits make up literally several million only. Like that's a process that is also clearly, at this time, there is no process that we know about for that. Did I answer the question or just confuse it more?
That actually was helpful. I'll look into the other piece of it. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Mr. Glover, again, is that new hand or still up? All right, so not hearing from Mr. Glover, unless I'll give you a chance to see whether you want to unmute. All right, hand down. All right, everybody, thank you for sticking to the ground rules, and also for the productive conversation we've just had for the last half hour. That will wrap it up for today, and we will be back tomorrow at 4 o'clock for Mayor's Office, Finance Department, Planning Commission, Codes Administration, and General Services. Thanks a lot, everybody. Take care.
This has been a service of the Metro Nashville Network. If you would like to see this presentation again, or for more information about this and other programs, visit nashville.gov.